Chapter 30 of Revelations, Part 3. The Argo's hull spun around Rainbow as she glided down the hull towards the cargo hold, and the ship lurched into motion. What did it matter if Saber wanted to use her as a distraction to protect her own crew? Rainbow would show her. She'd throw herself into the fray, kicking and screaming. She'd kill everyone on that ship herself if she had to. Maybe then Twilight would believe in her, or Saber would trust her, or the rest of Equestria would finally get the message to leave her and her friends alone. Strapping on her wing blades only took a few seconds. She went through the motions without thinking, flapping her wings and performing a few quick slashes in her cloud rune. Who is she mad at right now? The bounty hunters, her friends, or herself? The radio crackled in her ear.
"We're loaded in the sub,"
Saber said.
"Has Rainbow Dash left yet?" "I haven't seen her anywhere,"
Sunfeather replied.
"Applejack says she last saw her headed for cargo." "We aren't waiting,"
Saber said.
"Get us on top of that ship, Sunfeather. If Rainbow wants to sulk, let her." "Good copy,"
Sunfeather said, the sound of the propellers growing louder as the ship began to nose up.
"I'm pulling us out of the tower's shadow and climbing."
Rainbow's lip curled back into a snarl. She wasn't sulking! She turned around and lashed out with a shout, cutting a long gash in the wall of her room. Wispy cloud stuff trailed from her blade, water droplets clinging to the metal. She gnashed her teeth and made for the door, but paused as her eye passed over the small chest tucked into the corner by her bed. It was ugly and crude, as Rainbow had never had much experience crafting with clouds, but it was hers. She kicked it open, looking through its contents. A couple books she'd found, barely any time to read, cleaning supplies for her wing blades, a collection of wildly scattered bits stamped with markings from different islands, and a smooth orb of strange white stone engraved with the image of an open eye. It was heavy for its size. She hefted it in a hoof and held it up to her face, pondering on the orb catching the light and sparkling with shimmering rainbow light.
"This will give you your vision back."
Twilight's voice lingered in her head, hopeful and nervous.
"In some ways, it'll even be an improvement from before."
Rainbow's other hoof came up and brushed over her eye patch, pulling it back. She poked at her old wound with a grimace, cringing at the feeling. The eye carved into the stone was wide open and surrounded in arcane runes. It looked like it was in pain. It looked like it was angry. Every time she looked at it, she felt an echo of the moment where her own eye had been gouged out of her head with a sneering beak. She felt the fear and the shame, and it made her jaw clench and her ears flatten. She would never be that mare again. Bracing herself, Rainbow slid her eye patch off, pulled her wound wide open, turned the stone away from her, and pressed it against her empty socket. Old pain flared up anew as tears welled in her eyes and her hooves shivered, but she wouldn't back down. It was nothing compared to what she'd suffered before. Rainbow screamed as the stone finally popped into place, a wave of nausea rushing through her and sending her falling onto her side with a choked sob. She could feel the magic sizzling inside her skull, burning at nerves she'd only felt once before. Her legs jerked and spasmed as she rolled onto her belly, bile surging up her throat. It wasn't quite pain, but the intensity was almost unbearable. She gagged, vomiting her breakfast onto the floor. It stopped all at once. Rainbow panted, heart pounding. She blinked several times, feeling the strange sensation of the stone eye rolling around in her head. It moved with an odd, unnatural jerking that scraped at the back of her skull, irritating the scarred wound behind it. A few seconds passed, and she realized she still couldn't see. Nothing had changed. She had put herself through that pain for nothing. Again.
Fuck!
Rainbow stomped her hooves as she stood on shaky legs, shaking her head at her own stupidity. She must have done something wrong. Of course, it wasn't as simple as just pushing it into her head and willing it to work. She pulled her patch back into place and cursed under her breath. What if she had broken it somehow and wasted all of Twilight's work? Why was she always so—
They're firing at us.
Sunfeather crackled into her ear, calm and focused.
Grab onto something.
The ship suddenly jumped beneath her, the slow, steady spinning of the propellers that was always audible from the cargo hold growing to a loud, angry buzzing. Rainbow yelped as she tumbled backwards, bounced through the doorway, and spun into the open air with wisps of cloud sticking to her back. Her wings snapped open to arrest her fall, only for the floor to rise up to meet her as the Argo nosed up and pulled into a steep climb. She gnashed her teeth and pumped her wings, slowing her fall just enough to land hard on all four hooves. A hideous scraping sound rang through the hull an instant later. The walls rattled around her as the floor jerked to one side, a jet of steam bursting out of a pipe on the starboard wall. Rainbow staggered towards the cargo door controls, using her wings to balance as the floor rocked and swayed under hoof. Saber's voice popped over the radio.
Sitrep? Glancing below.
Sunfeather responded, voice strained.
They got lucky. It won't happen again until we're closer. Hey, whoa!
Trail said.
So it's gonna happen again? Even a blind fool can hit an airship when it's right on top of them.
Sunfeather shot back.
And that's exactly where we're going.
Any eyes on Rainbow Dash yet?
Saber asked.
Negative.
Sunfeather said.
Wait. Cargo door's opening.
Rainbow clung to the door lever as she watched the big cargo door slowly clink open. Snow rushed into the gap and flurried around the room, carried on a shrieking wind that pulled at her feathers and sent loose sheets of paper flying out from Twilight's room. Another sharp turn from the ship sent her smacking sideways into the wall, but she held firm, gauging the steadily widening space between the door and the hull with a narrowed eye. 3 seconds passed before she slammed the lever back into the closed position. The door froze with a mechanical clatter as gears shifted within its frame. Rainbow pushed off the ground with a powerful flap of her wings, half flying, half crawling up the door face as it began to close again. Adrenaline rushed into her veins as she raced for the gap, every nagging worry forgotten in the brief rush of speed. She tucked her wings in and shot out into the frigid cold, the thick door grinding shut behind her. She rolled back and spun, zipping between the twin propellers at the rear of the ship, along the underside of the envelope and out past the nose into open air.
I'll be your distraction for you, Saber,
Rainbow said.
Just don't leave me hanging.
Watch yourself, Rainbow.
Saber cautioned.
These are professionals.
Rainbow's grin widened as the crisp air pulling at her mane brought all her senses into stark clarity. Now there was nothing but snow and open sky between her and the ponies that would hurt her friends. And that was exactly how she liked it. The two ships were arrayed side by side, floating over the ice lake with several dozen meters between them. Wispy white trails of snow and vapor curled off their frosted metal hulls, betraying their speed. They were similarly built, long and slender toward the front and bulging out at the rear, where a structure almost like a short castle tower jutted up towards the sky. Rigid envelopes were placed on each side with small wings lining their frame, twitching up and down in response to their pilot's inputs. The smaller ship was open-decked. At least a dozen gun ponies crouched behind thin metal panels spaced along the railing. The larger was closed off, a long metal barrel poking out from a vertical slit on its prow. Fire belched from the cannon as she approached, the thunderous report echoing across the ice lake and off the surrounding mountains. And Rainbow turned to watch as the Argo's propellers twisted and its wings angled, the rear fishtailing out to deftly avoid the shot. But the bullet exploded before it even hit, leaving behind a cloud of angry black smoke and peppering the ship's hull with red-hot metal shards. Rainbow cursed. She needed to shut that gun down now. She scanned the gunship, searching for an entry point. The tower was probably the ship's control center, and it was ringed with wide windows that would have been easy to break through. But metal reinforcements were bolted haphazardly over the glass, leaving only a narrow band to see through. She frowned, orbiting the ship.
I guess it would be too easy if the same trick worked twice.
Circling towards the front, she spotted the long barrel of the ship's cannon jutting out from the hull. It clicked and whirred as it adjusted its angle, aiming at the zigzagging Argo in the distance. A moment passed, then it fired, the thunderous rumble causing the air to shudder between Rainbow's feathers as it recoiled deeper into the ship, before slowly sliding back out. Rainbow drifted closer, inspecting the point where the barrel met the hull. Rather than hard metal or glass, a ring of thick cloth protected the crew from the elements while giving the gun enough freedom to aim. She smirked as she angled herself away to get some distance. The gun crew would never see her coming. She was a few hundred meters away when she pulled up into a big loop, beating her wings and fighting the thin air for altitude. She rolled as she reached the loop's peak, extending one hoof in front of her and aiming her body for the gun mantlet like a bullet as she put on speed. She took in a deep breath of the crisp Arctic air, furrowed her brow, and began to channel her magic. The air gathered in front of her, focusing at the end of her outstretched leg in a little ball of high pressure. Wind tugged at her mane and roared in her ears, a swirling flurry of snow twisting around her body and fluttering in her wake. Her heart pounded and her wings ached, and the corner of her lip curled up into a cocky smile. She would show these ponies not to mess with Rainbow Dash. The wind screamed in her ears as she ripped through the cloth mantlet, the pressure wave in front of her exploding into the gun compartment with an ear-splitting boom. Rainbow hurtled after it, planting her hooves and skidding across the floor as snow flurried in her wake. She found herself in a cramped, busy room with rows of heavy shells stacked up against one wall. The center of the room was taken up by a long gun barrel mounted on sturdy rails and festooned with little mechanical attachments and trinkets. But Rainbow was more focused on the half-dozen ponies arrayed around it. They gaped at her through a haze of gun smoke. She flared her wings and crouched low, lips twitching up into a snarl.
Shit!
One mare lunged for a brass bell hanging from the ceiling, rattling the chain dangling beneath it and filling the room with a deafening alarm.
We're being boarded!
Rainbow rocketed across the room with one flap of her wings, grabbing the back of the mare's head and smashing her face into the wall with a grotesque crunch. The mare jerked and went still, the bell silencing above her. But other bells had taken up the call elsewhere in the ship, the ringing accompanied by the sound of slamming doors and pounding hooves. The rest of the gun crew barely had time to react before she jumped to the side, slicing a deep gash across one mare's chest and sinking the sharp end of her blade into another mare's throat. Blood splashed out against Rainbow's gnashing teeth, warm and thick. She caught movement on her left and dodged a wild blow with a clean step backwards before dispatching the unbalanced attacker with a powerful slash that left his foreleg hanging on by a thin string of flesh. Her hind leg lashed out, crushing the throat of a pony rearing up behind her, and her other wing sent a third pony stumbling backwards with a powerful gust of wind. Rainbow threw herself into him with a furious shout, both of her blades arcing down into his gut. Rainbow twisted in place, fixing the last surviving gunner with a one-eyed glare, as the corpses of his 5 comrades fell to the floor. He whimpered, turning and running out into the hall. "Help!" he called. "She's gifted!" Rainbow ran after him with a wordless scream. The fleeing stallion galloped past 5 more ponies rushing to answer the alarm, shotguns strapped to their sides and bladed helmets on their heads. The lead pony had just enough time to bring her gun up before Rainbow closed the gap. She shoved the barrel aside with one wing, buckshot ricocheting off the metal wall behind her with a deafening bang as she raked a blade through the mare's barrel and left her to die. The stallion next in line fired wildly, but Rainbow had already taken flight, twisting midair and scoring a deep cut across his back that made him cry out in shock. A Pegasus rose up to meet her, jumping high with a flap of his wings and lashing out with his own blades. She dodged him easily, hacking through his wing joints and letting him bleed out on the floor. The last 2 ponies in the little group went down without firing a shot, each one falling victim to vicious cuts that severed limbs and sent blood spraying across the walls in long spurts. Rainbow's hooves settled against the blood-slicked floor, her chest heaving and her eye wide. She glanced back to the dismembered corpses behind her, the blood painting the hall in intricate patterns, and her grin widened.
The gun's gone silent,
Sunfeather said over the radio.
"Get ready to drop. I'm bringing us in."
Roger that.
Saber answered.
Send us into the bridge and get clear.
"Wait! A crystal ponies!"
Tails interjected.
"Look!"
Rainbow stiffened, running back to the gash of twisted metal she'd punched through the hull and peering outside. The crystal heart had cast off from its moorings and soared out to meet the foreign attackers, its crew brandishing long hunting spears and carrying thick shields of bone and hide on their backs. On the open-decked ship opposite them, a dozen bounty hunters were lined up behind the railing, their guns leveled on the crystal ponies.
"No!"
Rainbow gasped as the invaders opened fire, the distant staccato pop of their guns carried by the stiff Arctic wind. Several crystal ponies fell and scattered until a larger figure, she recognized Bo from the way he stood, rallied them back into line. They slung their shields off their backs and planted them down like a makeshift wall, rearing up to throw spears back at the foreigners. Rainbow snarled as she turned away and took flight, racing deeper into the ship. The crystal ponies didn't stand a chance fighting guns with spears and hooves, but she couldn't leave to help them yet. As much as it pained her to leave some of the warmest ponies she knew to be gunned down, she had to make sure the cannon on the ship was silenced permanently. The alarm bells had gone silent now. She caught sight of a tail turning a corner and zipped after it, grinning when she saw a mare sprinting for a door where 2 others waited, urgently beckoning and calling. Their eyes widened as Rainbow came into view, their hissed commands turning into full-throated shouts. "Come on!" one of them called. "Run faster!" There was nothing Rainbow loved more than a good old-fashioned race. She burst down the hall in a flurry of wind, soaring over the running mare's head and digging her blades into the 2 holding the door. They fell with shocked gurgles and whimpers, clutching their wounds as Rainbow turned to face the running mare with a manic, blood-stained grin.
"What's wrong?"
she said, panting with excitement.
"I thought you came here to kill us, didn't you? Chase us past the edge of the fucking map?"
She flicked a wing out, splashing fresh blood onto the shivering mare.
"Well, here I am. Where's your weapon? Fight me!"
The mare squeaked, stumbling over onto her back as Rainbow loomed over her.
"Please!"
She held out a hoof, scrambling back across the floor.
I'm just a handy mare. I cook and fix things. I've never hurt anyone."
Rainbow blinked, brow furrowing. What? This was a bounty hunting ship, wasn't it? Why else would they be here so far north, talking about taking Saber's head if not to profit off some bounty? She stepped back and took a better look at the cowering mare. She was a mauve-coated unicorn, lacking any cutie mark, and with a belt of tools around her barrel. Her cheeks and hooves were marred with black stains, and her mane was tied in a tight bun. A pair of cheap goggles were tucked above her horn, little more than 2 circles of dirty glass held together with string and wool. She had no weapon, not even anything as simple as metal shoes for kicking. She curled up into a little ball and sniffled, quietly begging for mercy.
But...
Rainbow shook her head as a sudden headache came over her. Of course, even a bounty hunting ship would have normal working ponies on it. Mechanics and engineers, cooks and carpenters. They'd be owned and passed about like everyone else, helpless against the whims of their employers. Did this mare even want to be here? Had she already killed other ponies like this? Innocents?
no.
Rainbow grimaced, stepping forward and jabbing a hoof into the mare's chest.
You joined this crew on purpose. You had to. They're bounty hunters. You knew the risks.
She growled, glaring down at the mare.
You chased me here. All we want is to be left alone. I don't even know who you are.
The mare wailed. Her eyes darted from side to side as she hyperventilated.
I can't die here. Go away.
Pain blossomed in Rainbow's chest. She grunted, staggering back and looking down to the screwdriver that had been jammed between her ribs. The unicorn mare sobbed, letting go of the makeshift weapon and scrambling back.
I'm sorry. I can't.
Rainbow's wing flashed out, sinking into the mare's heart. She leaned in with a shivering snarl, forcing her onto her back as she gaped back in shock.
I hate you ponies,
Rainbow hissed. The fire in her breast flared up, burning away her doubts.
You're all dead.
The mare's head fell back. She blinked up at the ceiling, mouthed something Rainbow couldn't make out, and died. Rainbow pulled her blade out with a grunt, staggering back and feeling at the screwdriver embedded in her chest. Tears budded in her eyes, and she growled and wiped them away. What was she crying for? She'd been hurt worse before. She grabbed the screwdriver with both hooves, clenched her jaw, and pulled. It resisted her for a moment before popping free, drawing a pained groan and a trickle of blood. It splashed into the growing puddle of its owner's blood, rolling to a stop. Rainbow bit her lip as she raised a hoof to the wound, wincing at the pain of breathing. It didn't seem to be bleeding so much. She could keep going. She had to keep going. With a pained grunt, she took flight once more, speeding through the door the mare had been running to reach. She could hear gunshots and shouting above her, dulled by the hull. An open door on her right led to a narrow square stairwell, and she jumped up the steps from landing to landing, wincing with each impact. She came to a stop at a plain metal door, and leaned an ear against it. She recognized the voice speaking from the radio conversation earlier, tired, but strong, and carrying a stern metal.
"The brochure as the natives handled, my lord,"
he said.
"Has the security team reported back yet?"
No, sir.
A younger mare answered.
And the gun still isn't shooting.
Get that ship out of the sky, Captain!
This was the angry stallion, the one that had sneeringly offered to spare the Argo's crew in exchange for Saber's head.
They're coming straight at us! Sea Saber would never risk a ram,
the captain stated.
She values her ship and her crew too highly, and she knows she'd come out the worse for it. I expect she'll try to pass over us and flee south, but we'll keep pace and shoot her down from behind. What of the border?
The young stallion asked.
Where did she even come from? She's most likely dead already,
the captain answered.
One mare, even gifted, can only do so much on her own.
At that, Rainbow grinned.